everybody is looking up to that.
And these stories need to be told, and they are guided by the compass of their conscience.
From India for the world, the India Story, the show for the global citizen.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all. If you fail to prove us wrong, God help us.
Hello and a very warm welcome to our continuing coverage of the G20 Summit. I'm Molly Gambhir. We are starting off this edition with a quick look at the top stories making headlines at this hour. US President Joe Biden arrives in New Delhi to attend the two-day G20 Summit. In a short while from now, he will be meeting the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, at the latter's residence. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral meetings with Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and the Mauritian Prime Minister on the sidelines of the G20 Summit. And speaking ahead of a G20 leaders summit, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that the world is facing the risks of conflict as divisions between nations widen. North Korea launches its first tactical nuclear attack submarine, although Seoul's military quickly warns the submarine might not be operational. Britain's top police officer says an investigation into how a terror suspect escaped from prison would look at whether he had help. Fearing another washout, Asia Cup organisers have added a reserve day for the India versus Pakistan Super 4 stage clash in Colombo. The arch rivals meet for the second time on Sunday, and weather forecasts indicate the likelihood of rain. Leaders have started arriving in the Indian capital for the highly anticipated G20 Summit. The leaders of the world's major economies will be kicking off their discussions to coordinate policy on food security, debt problems, climate action, the war in Ukraine as well. US President Joe Biden has arrived in New Delhi. We've been getting you those latest images. President Joe Biden left for India on Thursday. His Air Force One has now landed in New Delhi, and in a short while from now, the US President will be holding a bilateral meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is going to be Joe Biden's first presidential visit to India, and there is, of course, a lot to discuss between the two sides. Joe Biden arriving in India after there was a lot of uncertainty over whether the world's largest economy will be at the table for the G20 Summit. This comes as the First Lady of the US, Jill Biden, earlier tested positive for COVID-19. That was on Monday. And following her test results, Joe Biden tested himself on Monday as well as Tuesday. And in those tests, his results for COVID-19 came out to be negative. And according to the White House, before Joe Biden was scheduled to leave for India, the US president tested negative for COVID-19. He will still be following the CDC guidelines as far as COVID-19 precautions are concerned. His arrival is significant in multiple ways when it comes to the agenda that the India and the US partnership really has on multiple fronts. For more on that, let's go across to Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone, who is with us on the broadcast and has been monitoring those developments. Also with me is our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Jessica, let me come to you first. What are the expectations as far as this all-important bilateral meeting between US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister is concerned?
Well, from the U.S. perspective, this president really wants to move the agreements forward that began and were announced in the June state visit of Prime Minister Modi to the White House. Of course, that includes the GE engine deal with Hindustan Aeronautics Limited to produce engines here in India with a GE design for the Indian Air Force. It also includes the drones that India is preparing to purchase from the United States. It includes some visa restrictions being lifted, H-1B visa specifically, a pilot program. And a number of other deliverables that began just 2 months ago. These two leaders are going to get together at the Prime Minister's residence just in the next half hour. As soon as we see President Biden come down those steps out of Air Force One, he'll be whisked away to the Prime Minister's residence for that single bilateral of his visit. He only has one bilateral meeting with any world leader, and that's with Prime Minister Modi here in the next hour or so. And then his schedule will take him into the G20 meetings on Saturday and very shortly on Sunday morning, where he's going to then go on to Vietnam. And that really brings in the other main objective, I think, for the Americans, and that is that they really want to build the partnership, both economically and from a security perspective with India, in terms of cooperating on Indo-Pacific security, whether that's maritime security, border security, and really create an opportunity, particularly because China is not here, in terms of its leader is not here, to take advantage of that space, if you will, that diplomatic space, to give the world an alternative to the way China is interacting with the rest of the world. And of course, the final objective for the Americans and for the White House is to get some kind of agreement on the Ukraine war. You know, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, is here in Delhi. He just came from Ukraine, where he announced another $1 billion of aid to that country. And this, of course, is a cause very close to the heart of Washington. Not so much some other capitals around the world, but it's a significant conversation that the U.S. continues to have at these G20 meetings. And it does make it difficult, as we've been discussing today, to come to a joint communique for these leaders.
Right. Siddhant, let me just get you in on that point. What would India's priorities be as far as this bilateral meeting between the two sides is concerned, given that this will only be carrying forward the momentum that has been gained earlier in June with the Indian Prime Minister's state visit to the United States?
Well, yes, carry forward the momentum is the larger focus, but on the table will be issues like making sure that there are work being done on nuclear reactors. Now we know that when the civil nuclear deal was signed in the 2008, it really did not saw any major practical investment by the American side. So now the focus is on smaller nuclear reactors, also the drone deal. And we know that how both sides are working together when it comes to the defense industry as well. Many of the announcements came during the Prime Minister's visit to United States, the state visit earlier this year to Washington, which saw the jet engine deal also being announced. But at the heart of this relationship is the strong bond, the living bridge between the two countries. There is huge and large number of members of the Indian diaspora. In fact, the Vice President is someone who has Indian ancestry, and both sides have been emphasizing on that. But there are challenges as well, including the visa issues. Many Indians have to wait for a lot of time when it comes to getting an American visa, and this is something that has been part of the ongoing conversation between the Indian side and the American side. But largely when it comes to a very substantive relationship, there are problems as well. But both sides have convergences in the Indo-Pacific, especially when it comes to a very aggressive China.
Right, just hold that thought there, Siddhant. Those images of the US President Joe Biden emerging from Air Force One, like we just discussed, in just a while from now, he will be sitting down with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for that crucial bilateral meeting where the two sides will be carrying forward the momentum that was earlier gained through that state visit of the Indian Prime Minister back in June. US President Joe Biden's arrival in New Delhi for the G20 Summit also had a question mark earlier in the week, remember, with US First Lady Jill Biden testing positive for COVID-19. But as per protocol, the American president did get tested. And after those test results came out to be negative is when his confirmation for his attending the G20 Summit in person was a key takeaway. As we were just discussing, wide-ranging issues on the table when US President Joe Biden in just a while from now will be sitting down with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, given the fact that the two sides have emphasized on the way in which this partnership has panned out and the priorities and the potential that the two sides really have when it comes to a wide range of aspects of their relationship, which has only grown leaps and bounds over the past 1 year specifically. There we have the US President Joe Biden waving out as he arrives in New Delhi for the G20 Summit. In just a while from now, he will be meeting the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for the bilateral meeting. And tomorrow, when the G20 Summit kicks off, is when the US President's attendance at that summit, along with the issues that will be on the table as far as the Indian-US partnership is concerned. But the broader agenda being that the US President Joe Biden's arrival in New Delhi for the G20 Summit comes with a lot of expectations for both the sides. Let me just get in our correspondent Bhairavi Singh onto the broadcast this minute. Bhairavi, we've already talked about the kind of chemistry that US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister really share. When it comes to strengthening the relationship between the two sides, we've also gotten those reports of India's formal request to the US government for the acquisition of the Reaper drones, a very significant development, and the aim, understandably, is to ink the final contract within this financial year.
Right, absolutely. That was on the agenda. Remember, it was discussed in the June visit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Joe Biden. The Reaper drone deal was something that the conversations had started about. A significant, the significant defense deal for India. There are also discussions likely on the small end reactors that will also take place during this, and the discussion on jet engines as well. So clearly, defense is high on the agenda between America and India, and significantly so. We have so many different levels of discussions between America and India, whether it's the 2+2 dialogue, it's the COMCASA, it's the Quad. We have been engaging in significantly when it comes to defense ties. And the other, of course, emerging area of cooperation is in critical technologies as well. So those are the things that will be looked at. Other than that, of course, there will be the question marks on easing visa rules. This is high on the agenda as far as India is concerned, and will be certainly a talking point. The war on Ukraine will be something that there will be a chat on between Prime Minister Modi and Biden, and clearly Prime Minister Modi will be pushing for consensus building on this. America has promised to come on board as far as consensus is concerned, but has also said that we will have to go forward with the Bali Declaration and move beyond that as far as making Russia accountable is also concerned. So there will be a fine balancing act as far as India is concerned with the US on that, but there are several other areas of cooperation on the multilateral level as well, whether it is climate mitigation or financing of multilateral development banks. That is also an agenda that India has for the developing world, the global south. It's something that America also wants to push for. In fact, has said, asked the Congress for $3.3 billion to mitigate some of the effects or influence that China has in terms of lending as well. So many areas of consensus building between Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi as he touches down. There's that short dialogue between the two sides that is likely to take place in minutes from now, Molly.
Right. Stay with me, Bhairavi, also requesting Siddhant and Jessica to stay on with me. Let's also get in Dov Zakim from Washington, D.C. onto the conversation. He is a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Dov, thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. A very significant a statement that we have been telling our viewers about coming in from the UN chief, where he warned about given the differences that the world is witnessing at this point, as the divisions between the countries widen, the risks of conflict are growing as well. And that has been something that India has been very well aware of, and which is why it's made those efforts to build consensus. And that has been the overarching theme as well for India's G20 presidency. To what extent do you see the divisions among the G20 member states, though, impacting the outcome?
Well, the absence of President Xi, I mean, he has sent his prime minister, and that's not a trivial individual, Li Keqiang, but the absence of President Xi, and of course the absence of Vladimir Putin, who can't really travel anywhere. He couldn't go to the BRICS conference, for instance, as well. That tells you that the split between those countries and their supporters and the West is as wide as ever. I know that India has been trying to chart a middle course. My guess is that, particularly on Ukraine, you're not going to see very much said in the communique. India has actually had a big win already, as I understand it, which is an agreement to bring the African Union in to the G20. The European Union is in, and I think Prime Minister Modi in particular has felt that the global South needs to be part of this very important grouping of countries. So that's going to be a big win. There's been some mention of the so-called Reaper deal. It's actually the Sea Guardian, which is a modified Reaper that operates as a naval drone. It's a $3 billion deal. And just to let you know how far things have gone, when I first started dealing with India many years ago, the most we ever did with India was if an Indian ship happened to pass an American ship in the Indian Ocean, there was some kind of formalized exercise. That was about it. In the past year, as has been mentioned, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi have worked wonders, not only in this big sale, but I would say that the cooperation on jet engines, the cooperation on high technology generally, which has always been difficult, has been moved so far along. And I would add, the real challenge for both the Prime Minister and the President is to make the bureaucracies work. That has been a problem always. But I think with determination at the top, you're going to see movement between the United States and India in the security world that you haven't ever seen before.
What does India's emergence as the voice of the global South and India's G20 presidency really mean for its position on the global map, for its global stature?
Well, I think it's terribly important for a couple of reasons. First, it means that China cannot be the only speaker for the global South, that India, with an economy that is growing very, very quickly, even as China's economy right now is suffering, and I would say that whatever numbers Beijing puts out are probably an exaggeration anyway. Situation's much, much worse. They've got an aging society and young people who don't have jobs. This is a huge opportunity for India to speak out for the global South. And because of the good relations that it has with the West in general and with us, the United States in particular, it could be a voice for the global South that China could never be.
Right, Dabzakem, thanks very much for joining us here on the broadcast. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time in this edition. We will be taking a very short break at this point, but thanking our correspondents, Jessica, Bhairavi, as well as Siddhant, for getting us those insights and the latest on the expectations from that crucial bilateral meeting which will be taking place between US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in just a short while from now. A wide range of issues on the table like we just discussed, and the outcome and the deliverables carrying a lot of weight also for India's G20 presidency overall and for the strengthening partnership between the two sides. Those visuals of the American president arriving in New Delhi for the G20 Summit just a short while back, and he will be meeting the Indian Prime Minister for a bilateral meeting. On that note, we're taking a very short break, but stay tuned to WION World is One as we continue to get to the key takeaways and highlights as India plays host to the G20 Summit.
India's global voice.
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show you what's happening around the world. We do the difficult part.
This weapon has been banned, but the US, Ukraine and Russia do not find the bombs problematic.
We also tell you why what's happening.
A new drug is making a difference in the fight against Alzheimer's. This medicine helps slow down a patient's cognitive decline.
We look beyond the text. We give you context.
Is China preparing for a war in the Himalayas? And tonight, we come to you with some proof.
Hypocrisy is stunning.
Do leaders mean what they say? Do they ever say what they mean? To find out how real news affects you, your decisions.
Just when Iran took one step in the right direction, its moral police is planning to drag it further back. And once again, the victim will be women.
Watch Gravitas.
Welcome and thanks for tuning in.
We don't impose our views.
Did India threaten to ban Twitter? Either that or Jack Dorsey is lying to you.
That is Gravitas. We let life breathe through our show. Gravitas, the informed show for an intelligent audience.
Alison LaGrange, and you're watching E-Club.
Here are the nominees for Achievement in Music.
People are totally wrong who keep telling me that